Welcome to History Hack. If you didn't know by now, we are the revolution. That means we're sharp, witty, lots of fun, but it also means that we're essentially the peasants in Les Mis huddled round a table in the corner of the bar with no money. If you enjoy the show, please do support us. We have a Patreon account by which you can donate a small monthly sum in appreciation of what you're hearing. Alternatively, we have Ko-fi, in which you can just do a one-off donation as a thank you if you particularly enjoy a certain episode. Either way, we massively appreciate all of your support. Hope you enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to today's History Hack. It's a very exciting one today. Alina has teed this one up, very excited about it, and then got pulled into a meeting. She's off somewhere crying, so I've got Chris with me. Hey, Chris.
Hi, mate. I'm also excited about this as I'm a recovering Dungeons and Dragons player. So I know far too much about stupid beasts that don't exist.
But every way I try and find you a girlfriend or make someone fancy you, you go and say something like that and ruin it. Like it's like
it would come up sooner or later.
Doing all of my good work, Christopher.
Well, they'd find my box of dice eventually.
This is true. They would find your box of dice and your Darth Vader cardboard cutout as well.
I know. Yeah.
Is it too late for me? Is it too late for me to cancel this? Hearing all this stuff.
Chris, why don't you tell us who has got to suffer our nonsense today?
Yeah. So today we have Jasmine Elmer, who is a broadcaster and historian who specialises in ancient history and culture, and she's very passionate about bringing the classical world to the modern audience. She's writing her first book on ancient goddesses, but she's here today to talk to us about mythical beasts and monsters. So, Jasmine, welcome to History Hack.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Love chatting to fellow historians, especially ones with cool accents, Alex.
Yeah. And just mad ones. So, whereabouts in London are you?
I don't live in London anymore, but the accent is from East London. It's from Walthamstow. What about you?
Sutton, so around southwest London. But Alina is East London as well.
Oh, is she?
We
could have done an hour of chats about the East End instead.
Well, we'll have to get you back
another time.
Jelly deals or something.
I feel like I could drop my accent and go into the Medway accent.
No one wants that, Chris. No one wants anyone to go full Medway. Is that even legal?
Do people even want 50% Medway? I mean, what's the percentage we can even take?
Not sure.
No.
Right, okay. We're going to talk about mythical beasts today because Alina prepped some questions for us. This is going to be really, really interesting because I don't think there's a culture out there, is there, Jasmine, that doesn't have folklore, mythical monsters and beasts, bogeymen hiding in the wardrobe, under the bed, whatever. They've all got them.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think that's why I quite like it, because it's one of those universal things that you see in, I mean, not just ancient cultures, but all cultures. Because, what are our modern day things that we're afraid of? We have monsters today. They might look more like our politicians.
I was going to say,
real. Yeah, there's quite a few that maybe aren't quite as mythical as we'd like them to be. But nonetheless, I think it's part of human culture and society, isn't it, to have things that we're afraid of in monstrous form. So you're right, every ancient culture and every culture since then has its monsters, and that's why I like them, because we all get it, don't we?
Yeah.
An easy segue into anything. If you like a monster, there's a culture you can go to that's got monsters, and you can kind of get into the culture that way if you fancy it. You might find an easier way to do it than that, but that's how I like to do it.
So I'm guessing then we could just start at Herodotus, can't we?
Well, if you like.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, is that where people started writing it down and recording it? Because I'm guessing, like, orally, it's even older than that, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're thinking of, like, Herodotus as a historian that's writing down factual events, right? Being one of the first that does that. But as a sort of, genre, history, writing. But, mythical beasts go way further back than that, because, from my perspective as ancient person, you're looking at archaeological evidence, you're looking at iconographic evidence, you're looking at that sort of stuff, which goes way back thousands more years than that, than Herodotus writing things down. But because this is, we're mucking about here, because obviously this is History Hack, right? So we're kind of messing with the boundaries here, because whilst this isn't really history, is it? We've just sort of gone, I know what I'll talk about monsters because I love them, but we're sort of like finding a little combination between the two. So it's not that historians aren't interested in mythical monsters, but it's in the domain more of archaeology, religion, kind of literature than it is firmly in history. So where does it start? I mean, it starts probably the first time humans could imagine things that they're afraid of. And I can't tell you exactly when that is, but I mean, that's going to be prehistory, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where they're, you know, kind of experiencing the world around them and having anxieties about it.
Sort of like the ancient mythical monsters and beasts representative of things like natural disasters like volcanoes or floods.
Yeah, well, one portion of it, because if you just think of it in a broader context of anything we're afraid of, there's probably a monster counterpart. And yes, natural phenomena, think about ancient cultures especially. We are, I mean, you know, it's topical now, isn't it, with the awful earthquake that's happened in Turkey and Syria. But we're always at the behest, aren't we, of these natural disasters. And perhaps in ancient cultures, they feel closer to them than we do today, in certain countries at least. So, yes, does explain partly certain certain phenomena like volcanoes or earthquakes. Not in every culture, but certainly classical culture, which is one of my specialisms, you get that. So the monster kind of like lives under it's the idea the monster lives under the volcano, or a volcano is personified as a monster. And that's kind of why it's like that. It's why it's so angry all the time and volatile, and it behaves like a monster, right? It's sort of like kind of got one eye on it all the time. You can imagine living under Vesuvius. I mean, before it erupted, and then after it erupted. Well, before they didn't know it was a volcano technically, but afterwards, you know, you're kind of like one eye on it. It's like a monster that lives among you. So yeah, this kind of connection to natural phenomena, including kind of like fear of the sea, fear of anything. I mean, I'm using my modern terminology here, very, very academic term. Anything that feels a bit dodgy.
Yeah.
Probably has a monster associated with it, I'd say.
I think we should. So Chris is a boaty historian.
Oh, God.
Sailors are dodgy.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing, like, if you want to go one thing that is the big unknown, still the big unknown, really. I mean, like, we're only just starting to get down to the bottom to have a look, aren't we? Technology wise, sailors and fanciful stories, trying to process things they see and hear at sea. How much of that?
Loads. I mean, just loads of it. I mean, you know, like, even just like, I'm not going to call a mermaid a monster, but even these kind of hybrid creatures that you get that live in the sea in all sorts of different ancient cultures and even modern exist. So like in classical mythology, you've got like Scylla, who's like the six-headed monster that kind of devours men. You've got Charybdis, which is a whirlpool. And that's that famous bit of the Odyssey, if you don't know that, the story of Odysseus, and he's got to like work out which way to go, which one to go near, and it's all. So I'm not going to spoiler alert it because I'll let you read it. I mean, you've had thousands of years to read it, but still going to give you more chance to read it because you haven't. But, you know, so we have this thing, and I think, I mean, like, Chris will be able to probably explain this a bit better than I would in that sense, but ancient cultures especially, they spend a lot of time on the sea because trade routes are really important. Like ancient Greece is what they call a thalassocracy, which is like posh word for seafaring civilization. So they move around a lot on boats. So they're on the sea a lot, so they need it. Like they're definitely going to be afraid about whether they're going to get from A to B, but also like in a monetary sense, if their cargoes are going to be safe. So you get loads and loads of stories about the deep. I don't know about you guys, but I'm still afraid of it now because we don't know. There's going to be a stat here that one of you might know, but I heard once that we know more about space than we do about our own oceans and seas. I mean, is that actually true? Because it's a wicked stat, isn't it? Is it true? Is it?
No, it is true, apparently.
Yeah, something like 90% of the ocean we haven't explored.
And that freaks me out. And when I saw the movie The Meg, that scared me. So I thought maybe it's there. I have a friend who's a paleontologist that's told me don't worry about it. I can sleep at night.
Yeah, I went out there with some clarification.
Yeah. But I think, you know, like...
The photograph of the Meg next to the U-boat of South Africa is completely faked, by the way.
Okay, good. I was panicking then. For a minute.
I've looked into it.
What about the Kraken?
Yeah, so like, I mean, the Kraken, obviously, you get all of these different mythologies, and it's always the same trope, isn't it? Kind of again and again and again. It's this idea of this monster. It can either devour people, or it can cause shipwrecks and, you know, giant squid-like creatures that kind of, you know, bring ships down. But if you think about it, for human beings, especially in earlier cultures, one of the most scary contexts you can be on the planet is probably at sea. Because if you're on land, at least you can run off and you can do other things. But at sea, you really are totally at the mercy of what the sea is going to do. So that's why you get so many cultures. I mean, every single ancient culture has sea monsters as part of them. And nearly always they involve, like I said, some kind of pulling the ships down and killing people, or just directly devouring men from the ship. So you get, they're all over the place, and it's absolutely a way of processing what they're trying. Well, I mean, is it a process? I don't know if it's a processing, because it doesn't sound like it's going to be good therapy, does it? It's not going to be helpful to go, oh yeah, there's a monster over there. It's more like an expression, outward expression of your inner fears.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it's safer for you to put that fear of dying at sea, which is a real fear. We know, like, the number of people that would have died at sea is huge. And I don't know what the stats are even today, but let's not scare all the cruise people. But you get, you kind of get this thing, you take it out of you, you put it over there, and then it's easier way for you to explore it. It's a safer way for you to explore your fears. If you put it into the Kraken, you put it into Skilla, you put it into whatever sea monster you want, now you can look at it and it becomes the other, so it separates from you. So this is kind of where, like, I guess a bit of psychology comes into. When you look at monsters, you're looking, so when I said, where's the history link? Well, we're thinking about how normal people are living their daily lives with these fears inside them. This is kind of a way that they try and explore those fears with some separation. So in that sense, we're looking at like a version of daily lives of the ancient people that lived in and amongst this sort of like world. I would used to say a scarier world, but this world is way scarier than theirs is. So I won't say that, but that's what we're getting at there.
What's the most terrifying monster you've seen, like, representation of?
Oh, terror. Do you mean actually I'm afraid of it? Like, as I'm actually looking at it,
because it might actually be real. Like, so we're talking about the problem.
Oh, you mean if it's real?
Yeah, well, the problem with the sea thing as well, isn't it? As you can go, that's ridiculous. But that ain't real. And you'd be like, prove it. Like Chris said, 90% of the oceans are unexplored. Prove it isn't out there.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's the hard bit, right? What would be maybe because of what we just said about sea monsters, maybe the sea monsters are the most scary because it's essentially knowledge, right? So we've got this, now we have more knowledge and more scientific knowledge. So that kind of gives us a certain safety net. And I think if you said why aren't you afraid of sea monsters? Oh, well, because they're not there. Scientists have had a little look or whatever. Yeah. Even though we've disproven that's not quite true. But that's why those are the ones I think are the only ones that remain. So they might be the scariest to me today because I guess it's still uncharted territory, which is part of this kind of process. So yeah, I mean, what an individual. I mean, I've got to be honest, I find more of them funny than I do, which is probably not the right way to think about it. Because some of them are just so mad that I just think, really, I'm not finding that scary. Maybe I'm just hardcore. I was brought up quite a lot on horror. There's not a lot not a lot that scares. When you grow up in the East End of London, I mean,
I've seen it all. Nothing scares me.
I haven't really got a very exciting answer, but I think sea, definitely. I've definitely got a thing maybe where the sea, I'm like, oh, what's going on down there? So I think the sea monsters are probably the scariest.
Yeah, there was another account of a U-boat being attacked by a sea monster in the First World War in the Irish Sea, apparently.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that in official documentation, or is that like a newspaper?
That's what the crew claimed, and there was damage apparently. Nothing to do with the captain having the door open. No, it's a long story, but yeah, apparently. No, but
I mean, all right, we're making a bit of a joke there, but like, it just goes to show that we're talking a bit here in an ancient context. This still exists for us, even today. Like, there are people today who still believe in the Loch Ness monster. And go hunting for it.
I actually did. I went looking for it. Did you find it? Well, no, because I only spent about a half hour and then I got bored and I left. There was a guy living in a caravan on the edge of Loch Ness, and he's in the Guinness Book of Records because he hasn't moved since the early 1990s.
Well, literally hasn't moved, or do you mean
he's not left Loch Ness
Right.
since 1992 or something. He moved in, he got divorced, sold his house, bought a caravan.
Not surprised.
Now he what about the divorce bit?
Yeah.
Now makes little models of the Loch Ness monster, what he thinks it looks like, but he has been sitting there waiting for it for more than 30 years.
This is starting to sound like a plan.
What does that tell you? No, Chris, you're not doing that. I will not let you do that. You're not there yet. There's still dating apps we haven't tried. Right. What does that tell us about the human psyche?
Well, that specific man, I think that man needs
No,
to
it's
be
not the
therapy.
need for answers, isn't it? It's the need for answers.
Yeah. I mean, basically, if you transport yourself back to any ancient context, you've got the human civilization that is springing up. Whatever culture you like, you can put yourself anywhere, and you've got this culture. But remember that at some point, human civilization reaches a boundary, and when you hit that boundary, so I'm talking about physical space here, like a city or something, right? And then you hit a boundary, and then on the other side is the wild, the unknown. So that happened a lot more than it does today. So I know, I live in Exeter. When I drive to the edges of Exeter, it's all right when I hit the countryside. I'm not going to be scared because that's not the unknown for me, right? But what's happening in ancient cultures, obviously it might not literally be the exact boundary of the city, but metaphorically it might be further or whatever. But then that's why they have this system in the world, if you like, of mythology and monsters and supernatural, because for them there is a literal potential when you cross the boundary from human civilization into the wild, the unexplored, basically the untamed. That's where monsters usually dwell. So there are
like all those old maps that have "Here be dragons," where they don't know what to draw.
Exactly. I mean, dragons are a great example because they transcend a lot of cultures. So you get them in lots of different cultures, but you also get them across time, and even all the way up to the modern day with our love of Game of Thrones and other such dragon-like programs. You know better.
That Matthew
Dungeons and Dragons.
Film. Yeah,
that's your thing. Yeah, I mean, I don't know nothing about that, but I do know it's actually down with the kids nowadays, isn't it? Or that Dungeons and Dragons. They're cool. It's like a cool thing to do, I think. So well done, Chris, because I don't know nothing about that.
Not if you're 42, but we'll discuss that.
Maybe for another show.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I was just trying to say is that you get this, when you get into this area of the unexplored, that's where monsters are, and that makes sense, right? Again, because I told you about this way you kind of disconnect your fears and you put them further away from you, but also it's this kind of danger of exploration. Like if I go out into that wild and I venture into it, what am I going to find? And that's where that's where all the dodginess will be. My official term I keep using, dodginess will exist. So actually it's fear, I don't want to make it make it really too much of a point on this, but you could connect this to fear of foreigners as well. And people I'm saying that I have no fear of foreigners. What I'm trying to say is that that's where it's xenophobia, isn't it? It's kind of what the opposite, the other, where they're coming from is a different place. And so it's kind of, monsters are an extreme version of that. There's kind of our human fears of other, the wild, the untamable. Because really, what is a monster? Is something that humans can't overpower very easily. I know they do in myth, there are various myths about this, which is a way of us appeasing our fear. So if we get Perseus to lop off Medusa's head, then what that is I'm putting aside patriarchy thoughts. What that is us taming the monster. So that's making us feel better, right? Yay.
Okay, right. But you've just mentioned the patriarchy because
I have.
we don't know what it is that sinks ships maybe in the ancient world or whatever. But
are you saying the patriarchy sunk the ship?
Well, what I'm saying is there's unknown stuff, right? But then no culture can claim not to know what a woman is and not to be able to overpower a woman. So why are so many monstrous figures female? I mean, you already mentioned mermaids, but Medusa, Ariadne, why is it always terrifying women?
Because women are scary.
We are, to be honest, let Chris answer, but I think Chris has got the right answer. Well, no, you kind of, because obviously, all monsters are on a hierarchy. So we were talking kind of about those bigger monsters that exist in the wild that devour men, and a lot of the things you were talking about originally are those kind of monsters. And then female monsters as a subcategory, if you like, represents something similar but also different. And that is, they often pop up in patriarchal societies, not always, but often do pop up in patriarchal societies. And, the fear of female monsters is like a double threat. So they've got all the monster stuff that we've spoken about that we don't like, fine. The other places, the exploration, Untamed, all of that. But on top of that, you get male fears about female power, and female power in different forms. So it can be kind of just literal power, and it can be sexual power. It can be all sorts of different types of power that women possess, that also go into these monstrous females. And so they become doubly scary in that sense to men, right?
Yeah.
To men, they become doubly scary. So the other thing that is really important is we have to get to this kind of point about women are the ones that give birth. So this idea that, if there are female monsters, it's the fact that they can give birth to more monsters. That's a fear. So there's the male fear of legitimacy, or fear of kind of offspring being a certain way. Women have that power because they're the ones that carry the children and give birth to them. So there's a few things that women represent that are particularly scary to men. And that's why, so for example, in classical cultures, like you just said about Medusa, that's why we get these monsters there that have a very distinctly female vibe, because that's a very patriarchal society. If that makes sense.
It does. I like the praying mantis, who literally just shags them, then bites their heads off.
Yeah.
You also get women getting punished by the gods a lot. Like Medusa was punished because she was beautiful. Ariadne is punished because she can sew and really well. And so it is a lot of women being punished by the patriarchal gods. It's usually Zeus. If he's not shagging them, he's punished.
I mean, I know what you mean. I hear what you're saying there. So, because obviously Ariadne's not. When we talk about monsters, we have to make sure we talk about monstrous. We didn't really give a definition, but what a monstrous thing will have certain components and they make them a monster. So Ariadne's not a monster; she's a female, right? So we can't put. That's the different point we're making when we talk about female individuals. But when you said about women getting punished by the gods, yes, they do, but so do men. It's about the behaviour of the individual and what that represents. And nearly always says at the heart of Greek myth, there's usually a mortal person that has decided to be better than the gods and shown hubris, which is arrogance, which is an arrogance where you think you're so much better that you're even better than the gods. And that they're the ones that need to be smited down. So Ariadne is an example of that. And that can be male or female. So you get that kind of, that mixes around a bit. But you're right that women in general don't always get the best outcomes in Greek myth, which is probably where that point's coming from. There's quite a harshness to it. So, and then that does link into patriarchy. So, there's kind of, when we're chatting about monsters, they're their own genre of myth that I think we need to keep slightly separate to just women. But you can look at women and monsters together in figures like Medusa.
We just bet with the mermaids as well. So isn't it that they lure men to their deaths, either on the rocks or?
Oh, that's the sirens, yeah. So they're not mermaids, but yeah, no, but it's not what you mean. So the sirens are like these bird-like female creatures that sing beautifully and lure sailors towards the rocks, and then they have a shipwreck because of that. So again, but that's, I mean, I don't want to keep poking on Chris here, but sailors and women.
We do it all the time. It's fine.
Yeah. Sailors and women, there's a history with that, isn't there? So, this is like sailors being kind of, seduced by these women and their beautiful voices and then dying for it. So it's a kind of it's like a sexual sea combo on that one, which makes sense if you think about sailors' lives.
And it was only the discipline of Odysseus of pouring honey into his men's ears so they couldn't hear, and then tying himself to the mast so he wouldn't be tempted. And with discipline, they can get past them.
Exactly. So that's part of again. So it has to be Odysseus, the leader, the wise man, that is able to deal with this issue by putting wax in the ears, exactly, and getting them to tie him down. But even then, he sort of knew that if he heard the sounds of them, he's likely to steer the ship towards them and die. So the Odyssey is full of loads of monsters, which is cool, but also loads of all of these things carry symbolism. I think the whole point of today is that We don't just look at the monster, but look at it again. If you're a history fan, it's looking at what that monster symbolises and what it can tell you about the society of the time. Because every single monster can do that for you. So even if you're like, whatever, that ain't history. But it is history, because what it is a reflection. It's like a mirror image of what's going on in a society. So it's like a kind of little neat way into any society you want to look at.
So why do they eventually sort of disappear?
Well, we just said we're still afraid of the sea, right? So,
Yeah. Well,
So you mentioned knowledge, didn't you? So with more knowledge comes less monsters, because we've ruled them out. But exactly, we haven't entirely ruled them out. But a lot of people are still massively susceptible to wanting to believe in. I mean, we could start talking about aliens as well in the same vein, couldn't we?
This is right.
Unknown.
Yeah, it's just basically like, I mean, perhaps ancient monsters specifically. Like, do we really believe Medusa's around? Well, I've seen Medusa got decapitated, so we don't believe she's around. But like, do we believe that it's possible these people, these monsters are still around? No, we don't. Why? One, there's a few answers to this. Obviously, culturally, we've moved on. But we've moved on, and we're more rational and scientific largely than we may have been in the ancient world. Most societies are probably leaning more towards the factual and the scientific rather than the kind of supernatural and mythical. That's one thing. Two, we explored the whole world. So apart from the seas that we're now all scared about, everyone's freaking out after this episode with that. But we don't have a lot of unexplored land anymore. So I know that Medusa's not over there because I've gone and had a little look, basically. And then, the other thing you said, that what are we afraid of today then? We are still afraid, right? We still have monsters, but they look different. And to me, we've pushed that boundary of wild further. So aliens is a great example, because what do we not know now? We don't know about life on other planets. That's our unknown. So the boundary's gone way out, right? Because we've explored planet Earth. So we're like, well, let's go further out. So, and I think, regardless of what you think about aliens, a lot of people, aliens almost certainly exist in some form, even if it's plant life or something. But they're silly to think the entire universe is empty of stuff. So most people do think that, and therefore that's scary to us, isn't it? And then there's obviously, you go down to the more extreme versions where people think aliens are visiting us and stuff like that. But that's the same thing. That's our modern version of these ancient monsters. These things coming to us. But the other thing I would just say is, I think that this exists in the ancient world, which is really cool as well as an idea. Not cool. I always do that. I'll explain this properly. I've just completely messed this up. But basically,
it's fine. Alina has referred to the Second World War as the fun war by accident at one point on this podcast, and everybody in the room just went, and then she realised what she'd said. Don't worry, it's a thing. It's a nerd thing. It's a nerd thing. We're fine.
It's a nerd thing. What I was about to say was just, I'm going to forget what I was going to say now as well. What I was about to say is this idea of the monstrous within us. So that's something that exists in the ancient world, but I'd say we're more afraid of. And the cool bit that I was going to go into was serial killers. So that was the thing I was trying to say. They did have discussions and fears about serial killers in the ancient world. And this is a real thing that people don't really. People think it's a modern thing. They think, oh, serial killers, isn't that just like the 70s were so shit that serial killers
they appeared out of nowhere.
That they just appeared, but actually they've been around for a while. So that I think now, if you think about how much true crime is something that we're all really fascinated, I think now the monster is even more we're more afraid of the monster in the human than we used to be in the past. But I just wanted to make the point that has always been there too. Like the monster in the person, that's something that they've thought about in the past too. And even philosophers talked about it. So, Plato, people like that. So that was what I'd say. Aliens and monsters in us, serial killers. That's what we're still afraid of. So they've gone, but they've changed. They've shapeshifted as monsters do.
Yeah, because there's the early interpretation of vampires were just people who'd sneak into other people's houses and steal bread and milk and then go and live in graveyards, because that's the only place they could live, in the big palatial tombs. And it's they come from taking the life's blood of the people to drinking the blood of the people. And children who are being kidnapped, it must be the witches and succubuses and things like that.
Exactly. That's what I mean about, this is why monsters are pretty decent, because every culture has its monsters. And even if you look at historical events, we were talking about World War II, but you know, there's plenty of monsters in that. They just don't look like the monsters I'm chatting about. So you know, I think that that's where anything that is an expression of fear, I think you can kind of, you know, change what a monster might look like to us today and throughout cultures and throughout time, but they're always there. They're not going anywhere.
Is there must be like a monster that's feared and reviled in one culture, but everyone thinks is great in another?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's Santa Claus. I mean,
well,
really?
I mean, there's probably a difference between another culture taking it and taking ownership of it and changing it. But I don't know that I can think of an example where, for example, this culture really loved this monster and the other didn't. Because you know, and that would make sense, right? I mean, I'm saying I don't know that I can't think of an example that fits that, but that also makes sense with the theory I'm talking about, because despite different cultures, all human beings possess similar anxieties and fears. So it would be a bit weird if one culture was like, oh, I'm really afraid of Medusa, and the other one was like, yes, Medusa, I'm here for that. That wouldn't really make much sense, right? Because like the culture would have to be so, like the human psyche would have to be so different in that. And obviously there are lots of different cultures and they take things differently. I guess dragons are more interesting actually, because dragons, we haven't talked about dragons too much, but dragons are probably the best example of what you're talking about. So there is throughout time, you can see dragons as sometimes becoming lucky, especially in kind of Far Eastern cultures. So, you know, like the dragon symbol is a symbol of luck and power, whereas originally it's a symbol, you know, it's a marauding beast that might breathe fire, it might eat people or whatever. But there are elements of it where they're kind of maybe more lucky. So that's a kind of thing where that's more of an evolution of the dragon, probably, rather than contemporary things at the same time. I don't know enough about the dragon in Chinese cultures to be able to tell you what the timelines are like when you put that against like, you know, Western cultures, like classical cultures or later cultures. But that definitely exists. So you definitely, like, the dragon's quite an interesting monster to look at, because, like, again, it transcends time and it's so popular in so many cultures. I mean, it's probably the first monster that people might consider, and it has such ancient origins. You know, it's in the very first cultures, and all the way through to today. So it's a goodie to look at.
Is it your favourite? Because predictably, Alina wants to know what your favourite monster is.
No, my favourite is the Chimera, and she'll love my reason why. So the Chimera is this creature, kind of fire breathing. It's a bit of a dragon. It's a bit of a lion, and the best bit of it is it's a bit goat, which is why I love it, because what is that about? So if you look at the iconography of this thing, it's kind of looks like a lion's body, usually, with fire breathing out, and it's got a little snaky tail. So that's like the dragon element. The snake is the dragon in a lot of ancient cultures. And then it's just got this goat's head on its back, which I think is absolutely brilliant. I just want to know. I just got this image of this bloke by a fire in like ancient Greece, just going, I'm going to make up a new monster. I'm going to chuck a goat on its back and see what everyone says about it. I mean, there is.
It doesn't look that scary. How can we make it more scary? Stick a goat head on it.
I mean, I'm joking about it. I do know.
No, but it's true. Like, you reckon it was just like? I really hope it was just some ancient Greek guy totally stoned off his nut on ancient Greek.
That's what I want. Like, I just want him to be absolutely pissed up and just going, I know what to do. Let's chuck a goat on it, and everyone goes, yes, mate, and that's how it goes. But I mean, there is a bit of symbolism behind it, because obviously the lion is a bit obvious, and maybe the snaky bit is a bit obvious, but the goat on the back is, some scholars have argued that it's kind of about like the domestic side of the monster. So it represents kind of because it's a female monster as well. So it's that kind of element of femininity that's about the domestic realm. I mean, maybe, but I just prefer the one where someone just, I mean, when I say the one, it's fully made up, it's not real. The one where I just go, yeah, I fancy that.
Yeah, I'm still going to go with the personified praying mantis from that episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where she was literally biting blokes' heads off. Just literally using them for sex and then biting their heads off. Like, I'm down for that. Like, that's a reasonable way forward. Maybe I'll start an app. I'm sure Chris would sign up.
Which dating app is she on?
Yeah. Go on, Chris. What's yours?
I think probably. I don't know. It'd be hard. I'd probably have to go with Gorgons in general. Just the whole story of Perseus and the reflective shield and the three sisters, and it's just fantastic. All the Minotaur, Minotaur is a fun story. I even use it now when I get lost. Like start leaving trails so I can find my way back.
I like the Minotaur as well because it's, you might potentially there's connections to the Minotaur and explanations for earthquakes because he's underground, and there's a lot of descriptions in the ancient texts of him bellowing, which is an odd term, and it sort of might represent the sounds of of what happens underground, and the labyrinth is kind of like womb-like and under the ground. So it's so sad, the Minotaur, because actually it's he's just discarded down there just because of the madness of his own birth, which is just really, I think it's really tragic. We don't talk, actually there's not a lot about the Minotaur in ancient texts really, but I just think he's really sad. He's like relegated. It's like, poor little thing.
The whole story's sad as well because the hero kills him, gets the boat back home, forgets to change the colour sails, leaves them black, and his mother goes, he dies, and she throws herself from the cliff and dies as well. So
that's right.
No one's a winner in that story.
Yeah, it's his father Aegeus. He's supposed to change the sails over to know he's safe, but he doesn't. Well, I'm not a fan of Theseus. If you ask a lot of classicists, especially younger ones, we don't like Theseus. He's a bit of a douchebag, really. So I mean, decent end for him. Quite happy about that bit. That's not a tragedy to me. I was like, yeah, fair enough.
I just love how Chris has managed to like basically empathise with the Minotaur being discarded and alone through no mistake of his own. He was just born ginger. It wasn't his fault. Let's end on a serious note, or because I don't know why.
Is there any point in doing that?
No, it's not that serious, really. It's just an actual structured question instead of us mocking Chris. Mythical beasts you've mentioned are representative of ancient cultures and can tell us a lot about ancient cultures. I think my problem as a modern historian with ancient history is every time I ask one of you lot something, your answer is, oh, well, we don't really know. But, so is this a way, things like mythical beasts and mad stories like this, is this a way to attract people to studying ancient history?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I've got to come back right at you because you started off a little war there between modern history and ancient history. I've got to represent that. I'm not going to let you get away with that. Come on.
There's no documents. There's nothing to look at.
No, there is so much. Do you know what? The genuine people ask us a lot, like modern history. Like everyone knows modern history, they know what it is. But when they go into the ancient one, like what you're actually doing, I don't get it. But the true difference is, I think, if you're a details person and you're getting into your modern history, you've got all that documentation. It's all there. Sometimes it's depending how modern a historian you are. You might have the actual direct words of the individual that you're looking at or whatever. You've got real direct evidence. Sometimes even, I can't believe that you guys get visual evidence like films and photographs. That's exciting. But but the thing is, like for us, it's like, you're trying to piece together all these different types of evidences, which I prefer because I like looking at a historical document, which usually involves translation, so it's language. And then you might be, oh, here's a little piece of the puzzle, and then I need to go to archaeology to fill the rest of it in, and then a piece of literature. So like mythical beasts and things like that are actually a part of this like mosaic of how we build ancient lives. So that I can see why it's frustrating to people that prefer to work in a more structured way. But I like it because it means there's so much to explore. It's so much more interpretation that you can put on something. So, is this a good way? Well, yeah, because it's a little piece of the puzzle. So I would never encourage anyone to go, let me just do beasts and move on. But the truth is, I do find, I don't want to say anything about your lovely listeners, but the monstrous part of it is something we all relate to. Whether or not, you get it. You were a kid, you listened to that story, you get this, whatever, we all know it. And because all of my work is about accessibility and relatability of history, that is a nice way in, because it means you're already happy where you are. You I kind of know. I've heard of this Medusa. I know what's going on there, and then you step in that way, and you think, well, wouldn't that be interesting to look at kind of ancient attitudes to women or other things like that in the ancient world or in this culture? So definitely think it's a great way to attract people to ancient studies.
Yeah, so I think it's all about bringing it all together and kind of a little bit of the mosaic. But then I don't know, because do you hate that then? Do you hate this idea of having to bring together all these different disciplines? Is that something that you don't like? Or would you
my world is simple. I spent the whole of yesterday sitting there with a bound volume of crap written by Admiral Jellicoe in his own words, like literally 5 seconds after something happened. And I'm spoiled. I am a spoiled brat of a historian, and I get that all the time. Me and my many, many documents. It's not. Yeah, I don't know. I just think it is mad, isn't it? It's like we look at each
really
other
different
across the historical divide, ancient historians and modern historians. I'm like, you're weird.
But could you, like, I don't want to drop the U-boat word again, but I'm going to. I'm tracing a U-boat that disappeared in the Aegean, and no one knows why it didn't turn up. Could you, as an ancient historian, go, yeah, Kraken? That's why it didn't turn up.
Well, no, that's not classical. No, because that's not classical mythology. I could go, no, Charybdis or something. I would love to be able to. I don't know. I think it's interesting. Maybe like people who are into ancient stuff. We like to make stuff up. Maybe we're just more into kind of like, use my imagination.
Turn up.
You know. So yeah, why don't we say that? I think your conclusion on what you're working on, Chris. Stop, put it all down. All you got to say, up comes Skilla. That's how they died.
Yeah. Like in that movie with the U-boat that goes into the dinosaur thing. I can't remember what it's called. Same thing. U-boats and Sea Monsters by Chris Sams, coming 2026.
Yeah. God help us. Jasmine, thank you so much for this. It's been brilliant. And you were talking about like using monsters and characters in classical literature and mythology to give a wider interpretation of history, and I imagine that's what you're doing with your book on goddesses.
Yeah, so like I like to dabble across the ancient world a little bit. So yeah, my book.
So you've gone rogue, like you'll do Greek and Roman. And
that's my original background. So my undergraduate degree was the entire ancient world, and then when I was actually a school teacher, so I specialised in classics then. And became a teacher. So that's why I've got this. And then when I did my master's thesis, I worked on monsters. So monsters is like one of my little areas. But this is what's so cool about ancient, because you can just be like, okay, I'm going to go to this now. So I'm really interested. Like the female monsters got me into thinking about femininity in a wider sense, and that's where there is a connection, because I've gone from like looking at monsters as part of my thesis. I'm thinking about femininity in a wider sense and moved to the book. So yeah, the book is going to be about ancient goddesses across a variety of different cultures, ancient cultures, and hopefully ones that people haven't really had the chance to explore before. And it's going to be a book for everyone. So, like it's one of those sort of public history books. You can just turn up and read it. You don't need to have a background in it, because that is what all my work is about. It's what my podcast is about. It's what my TV work is about. It's all about getting people into it. That don't have a chance, because you guys, I don't know how you guys feel as historians, but ancient stuff has a specifically bad rap for rep. Sorry, did I just say rap?
That's okay. You just sounded down with the kids.
We don't
I don't know if
you know about ancient rap, but it's so dope.
We don't do gatekeeping at History Hack. We don't.
No, I know you guys don't, but what I'm saying is that, like, when you think about the ancient world, you do it's even smaller community, and so it's time for that to move on. So that's what I'm trying to do with my stuff. So it's been lovely talking to you guys and meeting historians that do the same thing in modern history.
Yeah, me, you, Alina, Chris will blatantly tag along, and a pub at some point, I think.
Indeed.
A necessity. Chris can go to the bar.
It sounds like I've got to bring a date for Chris, though, if I ever meet Chris in person. Like, that's where we're going with this.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to put that demand on anyone who wants to come out drinking with us. You've got to bring a girlfriend for Chris.
Okay, I'll get looking.
Lord knows we've tried to find one and failed. So we're now farming it out. We're now subcontracting.
outsourcing
Fine.
it.
I'll get on it, Chris. I'll get on it.
And promise us that you will come back and tell us all about goddesses when the book is out.
Yeah, I would love to. I'd love to. It's been great chatting to you, and I hope I've just tried to give everyone a little bit of a foothold in this today. So if you love all this stuff, go and read up on some specifics a bit more. But it's been wicked being on here today. Thanks, and I'll be back.
Excellent. We look forward to it.
Our incredible guests give us 45 minutes of their time to join us and talk about their work or their new book. This is just a small taster. As a result, we have launched our very own bookshop on bookshop.org, where you can find our guests' latest books, you can support them, and you can support us on History Hack. 10% of every sale via our bookshop supports the podcast and allows us to keep going and bring you more top-of-the-line guests. You can find our bookshop at bookshop.org/shop/History Hack, or search for us in the shop section. Thank you so much for your continued support. We really appreciate our listeners and supporters. So make sure you get down to the bookshop and grab yourselves a new book.